when age fell upon the world, and wonder went out of the minds of men, when gray cities reared to smoky skies and tall towers grim and ugly, in whose shadows none might dream of the sun or of the spring's flowers' meads, when learning stripped the earth of her mantle, and poets sang no more save of twisted phantoms seen with bleared and inward-looking eyes. When these things had come to pass, and childless hopes had gone forever, there was a man who traveled out of life on a quest into spaces where the world's dreams had fled. Of the name and abode of this man little is written, for they were of waking world only. It is said both were obscure. It is enough to say that he dwelt in a city of high walls where sterile twilight reigned, that he toiled all day amongst shadow and turmoil, coming home at evening to a room whose one window opened not to open fields and groves, but onto a dim court where other windows stared in dull despair. From that casement one might see only walls and windows, except sometimes once one leaned out so far and peered at the small stars that passed. And because mere walls and windows must soon drive a man to madness who dreams and reads much, the dweller in that room used night after night to lean out and peer aloft to glimpse some fragment of things beyond the waking world and the tall cities. After years, he began to call the slow sailing stars by name, and to follow them in fancy when they glided regretfully out of sight, till at length his vision opened to many secret vistas whose existence no common eye suspected. And one night a mighty gulf was bridged, and the dream-haunted skies swelled down to the lonely watcher's window, to merge with the close air of his room and to make him part of their fabulous wonder. There came to that room wild streams of violet, midnight glittering with dust of gold, vortices of dust and fire, swirling out ultimate spaces and heavy perfumes from beyond the world. Opiate oceans poured there, lit by suns that the eye may never behold, and having in their whirlpools strange dolphins and sea nymphs of unrememberable depths. Noiseless infinity eddied around the dreamer and wafted him away without touching the body that leaned stiffly from the one lonely window. And for days, not counting men's calendars, the tides of far spheres that bore him gently to join the course of other cycles that tenderly left him sleeping on a green sunrise shore, a green shore fragrant with the lotus blossoms and starred by red goblets. In a dream, Kuranes saw the city and the valley, and the seacoast beyond, and the snowy peak overlooking the sea and the painted galleys that sail out of the harbor towards distant regions where the sea meets the sky. In a dream, it was also that he came by his name of Kuranes, for when he woke, he was called by another name. Perhaps it was natural for him to dream a new name, for he was the last of his family and alone among the indifferent millions of London. There were not many to speak to him, to remind him who he had been. His money and lands were gone, and he did not care for the ways of the people about him, but preferred to dream and write of his dreams. What he wrote was laughed at by those who issued it, but so that after a time he kept his writings to himself and finally ceased to write. The more he withdrew from the world about him, the more wonderful became his dreams, and it would have been quite futile to describe them on paper. Cronus was not modern, and he did not think like others who wrote. While they strove to strip away from life its embroideried robes of myth and to shew in naked ugliness the foul thing that is reality, Cronus sought for beauty alone. When truth and experience failed to reveal it, he sought in fancy and illusion, and found it on his very doorstep, amid the nebulous memories of childhood tales and dreams. There are not many people who know what wonders are open to them in the stories and visions of their youth. For when a child, we listen and dream, but we think but half-formed thoughts. When, as men, we try to remember, we are dulled with prosaic and with the poison of life. But comparison with horses along the edges of thick forests, and then we know that we have looked back through the ivory gates into the world of wonder which was ours before we were wise and unhappy. Cronus came very suddenly out of his world of childhood. He had been dreaming of the house where he had been born, the great stone house covered with ivy where 13 generations of his ancestors had lived, and where he had hoped to die. It was moonlight, and he had stolen out into the fragrant summer night through the garden, down the terrace, past the great oaks of the park, and along the white road to the village. The village seemed very old, eaten away at the edge like the moon, which had commenced to wane. Cronus wondered whether the peaked roofs of the small houses hid sleep or death. In the streets were spears of long grass, and the window panes on either side were broken or filmily standing. Cronus had not lingered, but he had plodded on, as though summoned towards some goal. He dared not disobey the summons, for fear it might prove an illusion, like the urges and aspirations of waking life, which do not lead to any goal. Then he had been drawn down a lane and led off from the village street toward the Channel Cliffs, and came to the end of things, to the precipice, down, dark past shapeless, undreamed dreams, faintly glowing spheres that may have been partly dreams and laughing winged things that seemed to mock the dreamers of all worlds. Then a rift seemed to open in the darkness before him, and he saw the city of the valley, glistening radiantly far, far below, with a background of sea and sky and snow-capped mountains near the shore. Cronus had wakened the very moment he beheld the city, yet he knew from his brief glance that it was none other than Selphais, the valley of Uth-Nargai beyond the Tarnarian hills, where his spirit had dwelt all eternity for an hour one summer afternoon very long ago, when he had slipped away from his nurse and let the warm sea breeze lull him to sleep as he watched the clouds from the cliff near the village. He had protested then when he had found him, waked him, and carried him home, for just as he was aroused, he had been about to sail in the golden galley of the alluring regions where the sea meets the sky. And now he's equally resentful of awakening, for he had found his fabulous city after 40 weary years. But 3 nights afterwards, Cronus came again to Selphais. As before, he dreamed first of the village that was asleep or dead, and of the abyss down which one must float silently. Then the rift appeared again, and he beheld the glittering minerals of the city, and he saw the graceful galleys riding at anchor in the blue harbor, and watched the ginkgo trees of Mount Moran swaying in the sea breeze. But this time he was not snatched away, and like a winged being, settling gradually over a grassy hillside, till finally his feet rested gently on the turf. He had indeed come back to the valley of Uth-Nargai, the splendid city of Selphais. Down the hill, amid scented grasses and brilliant flowers, walked Cronus over the bubbling Naraxo on the small wooden bridge where he had carved his name so many years ago, and through the whispering grove to the great stone bridge by the city gate. All that was old, nor were the marble walls discolored, nor the polished bronze statues upon them tarnished. And Cronus saw that he need not tremble lest the things he knew be vanished, for even the sentries on the ramparts were the same, and still as young as he remembered them. When he entered the city, past the bronze gates and over the onyx pavements, the merchants and camel drivers greeted him as if he had never been away. And it was the same as the turquoise temple of Nath or Thath, where the orchid-wreathed priests told him there was no time in Uth-Nargai, but only perpetual youth. Then Cronus walked through the street of pillars to the seaward wall, where he gathered the traders and sailors and strange men from other regions where the sea meets the sky, and he stayed long gazing out over the bright harbor where the ripples sparkled beneath an unknown sun, and where he rode lightly on galleys from far places over the water. And he gazed also upon Mount Moran, rising regally from the shores, lower slopes green with swaying trees, and its white summit touching the sky. More than ever, Cronus wished to sail in a galley to the far places of which he had heard so many strange tales. And he sought again the captain who had agreed to carry him so long ago. He found the man, Athib, sitting on the same chest of spices he had sat on before, and Athib seemed not to realize any time had passed. Then the two rowed to the galley in the harbor, giving orders to the oarmen, commenced to sail out into the billowy Cenarian Sea and leads to the sky. For several days they glided undulatingly over the water till finally came to the horizon where seas meets the sky. Here the galley paused, not at all, but floated easily in the blue of the sky among fleecy clouds tinted with rose. And far beneath the keel, Karanis could see strange lands and rivers and cities of surpassing beauty and spread indolently in the sunshine which seemed never to lessen or disappear. At length, the thief told him that their journey was near its end, and that they would soon enter the arbor of Serenian, the pink marble city of clouds, which is built on that ethereal coast where the west wind flows into the sky. But as the highest of the city's carven towers came into sight, there was a sound somewhere in space, and Karanis awakened in his London garret. For many months after that, Karanis sought the marvelous city of Zelphias in sky-bound galleys in vain, and though his dreams carried him to many gorgeous and unheard-of places, no one whom he met could tell him how to find Uth Nargai beyond the Tarnarian hills. One night he went flying over dark mountains where there were faint, lone campfires and great distance apart, and strange, shaggy herds with tinkling bells on the leaders. And in the wildest part of the hilly country, so remote that few men could ever have seen it, he found a hideously ancient wall, a causeway of stone zigzagging along the ridges and valleys, and two gigantic, ever to have risen by human hands, and of such length that neither could have been seen. Beyond that wall in the grey dawn, he came to a land of quaint gardens and cherry trees, and when the sun rose, he beheld such a beauty of red and white flowers, green foliage and lawns, white paths, diamond brooks, blue lakelets, carven bridges, red-roofed pagodas, that he, for a moment, forgot Zelphias in sheer delight, but he remembered again when he walked down a white path towards a red-roofed pagoda, and would have questioned the people of that land about it had he had not found that there were no people there, and only birds and bees and butterflies. On another night, Karanis walked up a damp stone spiral stairway endlessly and came to a tower path towards a red-roofed pagoda and a window overlooking a mighty plain and river lit by the full moon. And in this silent city that spread away from the riverbank, he thought he beheld some feature arrangement which he had known before. He would not have descended and asked the way to Uth Nargai had not a fearsome aurora sputtered up some remote place beyond the horizon, shewing the ruin and antiquity of the city, and the stagnation of the reedy river, and the death lying upon the land as it had lain since King Gynathrolis came home from his conquest to find the vengeance of the gods. So Karanis sought fruitlessly for the marvelous city of Sylphias and its galleys that sailed to Serenian in the sky, meanwhile seeing many wonders, and once barely escaping from the high priest not to be described, which wears a yellow silken mask over his face and dwells all alone in a prehistoric stone monastery on a cold desert plateau of Lang. In time, he grew so impatient of the bleak intervals of day that he began buying drugs in order to increase his periods of sleep. Ashish helped a great deal, and once sent him to a part of space where form does not exist, but where glowing gases study the secret of the universe. And a violet-colored gas told him that this part of space was outside of what he had called infinity. The gas had not heard of planets and organisms before, but identified Quran merely as one form of the infinity where matter through the streets and energy and gravitation exist. Karanis was now very anxious to return to minaret-studded Sylphias and increased his dosage of drugs, but eventually he had no money left. He could buy no drugs. Then one summer day he was turned out of his garret and wandered aimlessly through the streets, drifting over a bridge to a place where the houses grew thinner and thinner, and it was there that fulfillment came. And he met the cortege of knights from Sylphias to bear him thither forever. Handsome knights they were, astride roan horses and clad in shining armor with tabards of cloth of gold curiously emblazoned. So numerous were they that Karanis almost mistook them for an army, but their leader told them they were sent in his armor, since it was he that created Uth Nargai in his dreams, on which account was now to be appointed its chief god of evermore. And then they gave Karanis a horse and placed him at the head of the cavalcade, and he rode majestically through the downs of Surrey and onward towards the region where Karanis and his ancestors were born. It was strange, but as the riders went on, they seemed to gallop back through the time. For whenever they passed through a village in the twilight, they saw only such horses and villagers as Chaucer or men before him might have seen, and sometimes they saw knights on horsebacks with small companies of retainers. When it grew dark, they traveled more swiftly, until soon they were flying uncannily as if in the air. In the dim dawn they came upon the village which Karanis had seen alive in his childhood, and asleep or dead in his dreams, it was alive now. And early villagers curtsied as the horsemen clattered down the streets and turned off into the lane that ends in the abyss of dreams. Karanis had previously entered that abyss only at night and wondered what it would look like by day. So he watched anxiously as the column approached its brink. Just as they galloped up the rising ground to the precipice, a golden glare came out somewhere out of the east and hid all the landscape in effulgent draperies. The abyss was a seething chaos of roseate and cerulean splendor, and invisible voices sang exultantly as the knightly entourage plunged over the edge and floated gracefully down past the glittering clouds and silvery corsations, Endlessly down the horsemen floated, their chargers pawing at the aether as if galloping over golden sands, and the luminous vapors spread apart to reveal greater brightness. The brightness of the city of Cephalus, and the seacoast beyond, and the snowy peaks overlooking the sea, and the gaily painted galleys that sail out of the arbor and towards distant regions where the sea meets the sky. And Kuranes reigned thereafter over Uthnagai and all the neighboring regions of Dream, and held his court alternately in Self-Eyes and Cloud-fashioned Serenian, and he reigns there still, and will reign happily forever. Though below the cliffs at Innsmouth, the channel tides played mockingly with the body of a tramp who had stumbled through the half-deserted village at dawn, played mockingly, and cast it upon the rocks by ivory-covered river towers, where a notably fat and especially offensive millionaire brewer enjoys the purchased atmosphere of extinct nobility.